Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Croxford. I'm your moderator for this session today with Dr. Michael Simpson from the Office of Naval Research. And as you can tell, if you've been listening, people are thrilled that Dr. Simpson is here with us today, and so are we. I'm going to be presenting his slides. I'll also be monitoring the chat for questions. So if you have questions, we ask you to type them into the chat. I will like them so you'll know that I've seen them. And when Dr. Simpson pauses in this presentation, we'll go ahead and we will ask your questions and run through it that way. The slides will be shared via Canvas, as will this presentation, which is being recorded today. And those should probably be up and emailed available to you on Monday. So without further ado, I will give you Dr. Simpson.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. And I am going to shut off the camera here just because of bandwidth. But you will be able to see the slides. I'll be able to see the slides and be able to hear you as well and hopefully you can hear me. So I'm going to shut that off. And I'm just going to use the slides that you can see and talk from those to convey some ideas that are useful in writing grants. Let me first give a little context about my current work and prior experience in relation to grant writing. I am currently in the public sector, the executive branch, specifically in the Office of Naval Research, what I might abbreviate every now and then as ONR. And whenever I say naval, what that means by definition is both Navy and Marine Corps. Both of those are wrapped up in the term naval. I'll use the FY24 Department of Navy Science, Technology, Engineering, Math funding opportunity announcement, uh, STEM FOA, to highlight considerations important in writing grants. So ONR seeks research and people to do the research. STEM has deep and broad interests, for example, activities at benthic vents, through the water column, surface waters and land, through the air column and into space. Those are all places that Department of Navy and people who work for Department of Navy live and operate in. So Navy really needs to be knowledgeable about those environments and to be prepared to have people operate in those environments. So the breadth of interest of the part of Navy is one reason I really like working for Department of Navy is because their interests are so broad and deep. Now, the FOA that I'm talking about here seeks innovative ways to develop and deliver access to persons with STEM capabilities to help the Department of Navy better accomplish mission. And again, that's a very broad and deep mission. Abstracts of current grants are at the ONR website, and those abstracts suggest the breadth of STEM skills, including across a wide range of ages, education, experience, from elementary school through postdocs, veterans, and military-connected persons. Now, that compilation of abstracts in the ONR website are just of current live grants. They do not have the abstracts of completed grants. If you're interested in anything that's completed, and if you're interested in the topic, please let me know, and I'll see if we did something in those areas. But the current grants already give an indication of, again, the breadth and depth of interest of what Navy's interested in calls STEM. So prior to my current work, I was in the private sector computer sciences corporation. I did team writing of major submittals to grant and contract opportunities. I was also involved in the Department of Defense Mentor Protege program, wherein small businesses partner with larger businesses to increase their footprint in the defense industrial base. Prior to Computer Sciences Corporation, I was in the public sector, in the legislative branch, in the U.S. Congressional Research Service. where basically I was helping inform members and staff of the U.S. House and Senate. And that included exploring with them if they were looking to use possibly grants to accomplish tasks important to their district or state. Then prior to that, I was in academia as an undergrad and master's and doctoral grad student, and I, like so many people, benefited from the success of the PI and institution having gotten grants. So again, I'll use the FY24 Don STEM funding opportunity as an example. These are the slides that I've used in webinars to inform persons interested in this FOA. I should note that the FY24 FOA that I'll be using these slides from is closed, so this is not an active opportunity. However, the replacement for this, the FY25 Don STEM FOA, will be publicly released in about the December timeframe. So if this kind of work is interesting to you, feel free to contact me, and I can certainly go through the FY25 version with you, as I do with anybody who's interested in, again, Don STEM funding through this particular opportunity. The interests, again, are really broad and wide for Navy, and really, if you're, an associate professor or a dean or a chair, a PhD candidate or grad student, a postdoc thinking of joining a company or starting your own, whatever your current role, I'll convey to you some concepts to consider when writing for a grant. So again, this is the title slide of the webinar material that I'd present to persons interested in the Don STEM FOA. The things to consider, just even from this title slide, in writing for any grant, be sure to learn about opportunities of all sorts that are of interest to you, and you go to grants.gov as a good place to find that information. You can also go to your state organizations to see about state opportunities. There are certainly companies out there, excuse me, that can help you find the kinds of opportunities you're interested in. There are other organizations that can find opportunities for you. I'm not going to endorse any of those. I do want to just say, though, that for the federal government, grants.gov is pretty much the place to go to find grant opportunities. I should note that funding opportunity announcements, FOAs, and broad agency agreements are for grants, and you need to go to other sources if you're interested in contract opportunities. The principal differences you may know, of course, is that typically contract opportunities are much more defined, with things like contract deliverables and exact things that the government is interested in, a defined schedule, whereas funding opportunity announcements and broad agency agreements are much freer. They are looking for innovative solutions to particular problems that an agency of the government might have, but it's not to the point where they can specify, the way they could specify, a military round or a pack of pencils or something like that. So on the next slide, please. What this is when I'm talking to interested persons and entities about the Don STEM FOA, this is just the agenda. And what I want to highlight here is to always check to see opportunities to ask questions. With the Don STEM FOA, the questions are solicited from registrants. They can pre-submit their questions and we will answer those during the webinars. And then there are also questions that are submitted during the webinars, and we'll try to get to those in the webinars. If there is not enough time, then we will answer those questions offline. But answering questions is usually a very useful thing for you because you can ask specifically what you're interested in that might not be covered in the particular presentation. And as you're writing for a grant, it's always useful to have the most targeted information for what you're trying to do. So definitely look for opportunities to ask questions, including whether they need it to be pre-submitted or whether you can ask during the actual presentation. On the next slide, this talks in general overview terms about federal grants. So this goes back to some basic concepts, definitions, and terms that specifically, for example, to remember that a grant is the transfer of anything of value from the federal government to a non-federal entity to carry out a public purpose. There can be value in partnering with a federal agency. So right there, there's a value. Stimulating the economy can happen from a grant. The economy that's stimulated from a grant can be local, regional, national, global, all sorts of scales. Funding opportunity announcements have instructions on how to apply. And it's always important to make sure that all of those instructions are explicitly and correctly followed. Unfortunately, there are still systems out there that need to be given exactly correct information, or the submittal will die and not go to where it needs to go properly. So definitely, whatever instructions are there on how to apply, be sure to fully and correctly follow those instructions. So on the next slide, it's an overview about this particular Department of Navy STEM funding opportunity announcement. As with all situations like this, check about your eligibility. For this particular opportunity, the eligibility is that you need to be a non-federal entity and non-foreign. There are other opportunities out there that might allow for foreign participation, depending upon what it is you're trying to do and depending upon where you might be. That could be an important eligibility consideration. The non-federal requirement is also something to check to make sure that if the FOA you're interested in says that it does not allow federal participation, that you check to make sure that you comply with the requirements. In this particular DON-STEM FOA, you need to clearly say what the problem is that you've observed. In this case, that Navy has a problem with regard to some particular STEM aspect or capability, and give the evidence of why you're making that observation. And then, of course, you would present your solution, which, of course, is the best solution possible. So you've clearly stated the problem you observed, evidence for that problem, given your solution, and you also need to satisfy all the other requirements. For example, here in this DON-STEM FOA, some of those other requirements include things like how you're going to handle diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also sustainability of your activities. I'll say more about those in a few slides here, but those are all, again, things to keep in mind as you write for a grant from this or similar kinds of opportunities. So on the next slide, please. This talks about the submission process. And in particular, in this particular DON-STEM FOA, it's a two-step process. The first step is to submit a required white paper. There's no way out of that. You must submit a white paper. And again, as with all the instructions, be sure to absolutely and correctly follow the instructions for submittal of the required white paper. And the white paper needs to go into FedConnect, which is an outside company, not connected with it's not part of the government. And that is really where, again, the submittal needs to be absolutely, fully, completely correct in order for FedConnect to be able to get your submittal to the federal agency, in this case, Department of Navy, so that we can actually see it and work from it. It is too often when a submittal may get to FedConnect, but because something was not exactly fully correct in the submittal to FedConnect, FedConnect cannot send it to us. And so we will not see that submittal, even though FedConnect may acknowledge that you submitted it to them. But because there might be some typo or other error, they weren't, from FedConnect, able to send what you submitted to us, where we actually do the evaluation. So there are provisions usually within thought out FOAs that say if you don't get a confirmation from us, to contact us to make sure that what you submitted to FedConnect actually got to us. In this case, the us is the Naval STEM Coordination Office. A confirmation from FedConnect is not a confirmation from the Naval STEM Coordination Office. And so we have built into the FOA a number of fail-safe provisions to make sure that you know that whatever you submitted actually did make it into FedConnect correctly and correctly went from FedConnect to us for us to be able to evaluate. So again, all of that, again, needs to be absolutely correct for everything to work. The white papers are required. The process is that the white papers are evaluated and we down select from all the white papers, and certain white papers we will invite proposals from, and proposals that are invited from selected white papers need to go into grants.gov, not FedConnect. So again, it's a piece of instruction that really needs to be followed correctly so that, again, what you submit, either at the white paper stage or at the invited proposal stage, is correctly labeled so it can go to the proper places. It's unfortunate that all of these things are so finicky, but they are. And so the guidance is to just make sure that everything you submit is absolutely fully correct in order for them to actually progress to where they need to be. So in the next slide, please, talks about white papers. And that again, white papers are the first step of a two-step submission process. The content of the white paper and the evaluation criteria are described. And in the webinars, I go through these and point out all the things that we are looking for when somebody submits a required white paper, and the space limits are given there. And so you can, again, be sure to follow anything that's provided as an instruction fully and accurately. So the next slide, we get into the start of discussion about evaluation criteria. The evaluation criteria clearly needs to show how what you're trying to do aligns with the Department of Navy mission. And you need to note targeted beneficiaries and partners of the grant work, including, for example, technical and community colleges. Those certainly can be part of what you're trying to do as providing the ideal solution to the naval STEM problem that you've observed. Places, entities that submit to the DON-STEM FOA are not restricted to institutions of higher education. It could be career technical education, it could be lower grades as well. Those are all wide open, but I mentioned all ages and stages of education experience. That really is the universe within which this DON-STEM FOA does operate. And in this evaluation criterion, to be specific and real, to get a statement that what you're trying to do is going to be useful to the Navy, is not specific enough to really be valuable in the evaluation. So there needs to be again a specific and real statement of what aspect of Navy, what community of Navy, what purpose of Navy is going to benefit from your intervention, from your activity. And you need to be very clear as to, again, the real benefit to Navy of what you're proposing to do. So that specific benefit to Department of Navy communities needs to be very clear. And those communities can be local or regional or global. But it just needs to be very clear as to what you are saying you're trying to do and who will benefit and will work with you on those particular pieces of your approach. So on the next slide, please. We're continuing on with evaluation criteria. In this case, it's having to do with scientific and technical merit. So just as in writing for a research grant, for the DON-STEM grants, you need to describe the problem that you've observed and the evidence for that problem, what solutions have been tried before, what's been done in this case in STEM outreach and education, what's your new and innovative solution? This non-STEM FOA is for pilot, demo, innovative new approaches, terms and ideas like that. It is not for sustaining existing efforts. This is supposed to be funding for, again, new and innovative activities, not to sustain things already rolling. So you would need to show what's different in what you're proposing, different from prior efforts. Some of the difference could be described, if it's the case, having to do with opportunity costs, that your new approach might have better uh, opportunity costs, and that's why you're proposing this new approach. In all that you propose, you also need to be very clear about the measures or the metrics of progress and also of the status of your activities. All of those need to be put in the white paper initially so that the evaluators can see that um, your solution to the problem that you've stated can't be measured, and that would be one of the things that the evaluators will use to evaluate the scientific and technical merit of what you're proposing. So let's go to the next slide, please, which is continuing on with evaluation criteria. This one has to do with program viability during and after the period of performance. So you can consider, academic organizations, you can consider for-profit organizations, you can consider nonprofit partners as all part of your intervention if that's how you see the solution you want to propose involving. You can incorporate all of that, but you need to tell a plan that's very clear that provides for all of that. The plan could be literally to be able to say that as the Department of Navy funding ramps down, if that's the way you're going to approach it, that while the Dawn funding is ramping down, that you're ramping up some other source of funding to make sure that the program is going to continue to be viable after the Department of Navy funding. There could be literal buy-ins from other organizations that they like what you're doing to the point where they want to buy into what you're doing. It could be, an academic institution that wants to literally buy into what you're doing. They don't have the ability to do what you propose to do, and so they're willing to buy into what you're doing. That would be one way to show that your activity, your initiative, your program is going to be sustained. It's going to have viability after the period of performance. Now, within the funding opportunity announcement, there are instructions about font size and those kinds of things. Look at the instructions carefully because sometimes a table might escape some of those size limitations. And a table might be a way to really pack in information that you otherwise in text would be straining at the limits to get that information in. Sometimes in a table, not only is it more visually obvious as to what you're trying to say, but again, things like font size might not apply to a table that you can pack in more information than if you try to do it in the text. So that's one thing to, again, to consider as you're putting together what you're writing for a grant. The support is not just monetary, it also should consider people. That if you're having some kind of program that relies upon some number of students coming in and flowing through, or some number of teachers, or some other people who are participating in there, that you would have the viability sustained by having the right numbers of people continue to be aware of what you're doing, to come in and do what they're supposed to do, and then you've provided for that flow of people. So it's not just money, but also people and also support so that the organization that you're part of, you need to show that the organization is going to continue to be supportive of what you're doing. Sometimes, unfortunately, the support of an effort and intervention hinges on one person. And if that person leaves or retires or dies, um, the viability of the program literally dies also. So you need to show how support, not just in money, not just in people flowing through, but also in organizations, is going to be there to make sure that your activity is going to be viable after the period of performance. So, really, what we're looking for are creative solutions that really will address um, the particular problem that you've pointed out with the particular solution that you're suggesting, that you've thought about and actually put in a plan as to how what you're doing will be sustainable, viable, even after the period of performance. Okay, next slide, please. This slide talks about the diversity, equity, and inclusion components of the program that you're suggesting. Now, there needs to be an actual plan to reach, inspire, re-inspire, and to network diverse persons with Department of Navy needed STEM skills. You can't just count on the demographics of an area. There actually needs to be a clear and real plan for doing the kind of outreach and again, the re-inspiration and the connecting of people to make sure that they stay with the program so that the diversity, equity, and inclusion components of this program that you're suggesting are again not just based on the demographics of an area, but that you actually have a plan in place to make sure that the DEI considerations for your program line up with those that are thought of as being important for the DON-STEM FOA. Diversity is described within the DON-STEM FOA, and it isn't just a single consideration. It actually is a range of considerations and so you can see in the FOA the kinds of things that are considered to be diverse, and that includes type of education, type of experience, being military connected, maybe part of what the location is. Those are all ways of counting as being diverse. And so you need to have a plan to show how what you're doing meets the diversity, equity, and inclusion considerations for this program. You also would need to show that what you want to do is compliant with the local, state, and other policies and laws. As we all know, there are um, some local, state, other policies that affect diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So you need to show that what you want to do complies with your local requirements as well as those interests of the Department of Navy. So on the next slide, please, we talk about naval partnerships. This is really a place that it's useful to show interactions with real naval personnel, basically like you would do at a conference, to kick around ideas and refine those ideas of what you want to do to come up with that solution to the naval STEM problem that you've observed. To actually interact with real naval persons is one way of showing that it's not just an academic thought that you've had, but that you actually have kicked it around with some naval people to see really if what you're thinking will fit and work within naval communities and with naval people who would actually be potentially partners with you in carrying through your project. If there are naval people that you have connected with to kick around your ideas, they might be able and willing to offer a letter of interest. And a letter of interest is also a useful thing to include at both stages, the required white paper and also the invited proposal. A letter of interest shows again that what you've done is not just thought about an academic problem with an academic solution, but that you've kicked around your ideas and refined them by talking with actual naval personnel. That's a useful thing. So consider all options for partnering. For example, you could go to a private for-profit that might set up a co-op program. You could go to, say, an academic entity to again buy into your program. You might go to a nonprofit to set up maybe an internship program. Those are all things that could be part of your partnering efforts And it all, again, would be ways to indicate to the evaluators that, again, you've actually reached out to real people with Navy and refined your ideas to make sure that they are exactly on target to what you're trying to do. So next slide, please. And here's where we talk about the evaluators and the evaluation process. And this is really important because these are the people you're writing for. This is the audience for whom you're writing for a grant. When the white papers come in, which again is a required first step, we go across all of Department of Navy and we ask for volunteers to evaluate the required white papers. Uh, a very good number of Department of Navy personnel come forward voluntarily to evaluate the required white papers. We don't pay them. We don't give them anything special to evaluate, but because they recognize the need to develop and have access to people with new STEM skills that Department of Navy needs to better accomplish mission, these Department of Navy personnel volunteer to evaluate the required white papers. We give them uniform training so they all know how to evaluate to the same degree in the same way. We give them a uniform evaluation form. We go over all that in our uniform evaluator training. We check scrupulously for conflicts of interest to make sure that that doesn't come back as a problem, that an evaluator was unduly influenced by something. We do secure non-disclosure agreements. So again, this is all to make sure that the evaluators are doing fair evaluations of in this case, the required white papers. After they've submitted their completed evaluation forms, we compile all of that and we have a consensus meeting. And from that will emerge the white papers from which we will invite proposals. Um, Not every white paper is going to be invited to submit a proposal. Now, the process for evaluating proposals is similar. Again, when those come in, we go across all of Navy and we ask people to volunteer to evaluate proposals. Uh, same uniform training and forum, consensus meeting. And then from that will emerge the proposals that will we will recommend be turned into grants. So that is the process. Let me go back to the Department of Navy volunteers. Again, they are all Department of Navy personnel. They are all over the place, literally. They are mostly civilian scientists and engineers in naval installations, but some of them are in uniform and are on ships. Wherever they happen to be, and they volunteer to be an evaluator, we get all of the information to them, the white papers, we go through the training, everything else, as I mentioned, and all of the Department of Navy volunteers then do their evaluation. One of the reasons why this whole process is so important, why I'm spending so much time on it, it's because, again, these are the people you're writing for. This is your audience. You're trying to convince them that what you have observed as a naval STEM problem and your solution is really needed by Navy. And it needs to be clear to all of the naval evaluators that Navy needs this thing. So no matter whether they're on a ship or whether they're in a naval facility in Florida or a naval facility in California, uh, whatever it is that you submit has got to really scream Navy. And so the naval evaluators need to hear loud and clear that what you're suggesting is really important to Navy. We do not go to the National Science Foundation. We don't go to Army. We don't go to anything outside. We just count on our naval subject matter experts to evaluate the white papers and then the invited proposals afterward. But that's only part of it. The evaluators have got to be convinced not only that what you submitted is important to Navy, but they have to be convinced that it's so important that there is so clear a benefit to Department of Navy that Navy needs to pay for this thing. So again, we can't count upon NSF paying for it. We can't count upon Army or other parts of the government paying for it. We, Navy, are going to get some unique naval benefit from what you're suggesting that we, Navy, need to pay for. So those are really two things that need to come across clearly in your required white paper and then invited proposal. It's got to scream Navy so loudly with unique benefits that Navy needs to pay for it. So those are two really important considerations as you write to the evaluators through the evaluation process for the non-STEM FOA. Okay, next slide, please. And this is simply a white paper calendar with dates of various steps that need to be done in order to, again, submit your information to the Department of Navy STEM office so we get the things in time to evaluate and you get the confirmation that we actually have received your submittal, again, with the required white paper first and then the invited proposal. These are important dates to follow. Make sure that all the steps are followed correctly, especially, again, all the parts necessary to submit your uh, white paper to FedConnect. Again, unfortunately, because FedConnect is finicky. It has no AI associated with it to correct errors or anything like that. So again, I'm being very repetitive about the point of being absolutely fully correct in submitting things. The calendar here helps show when you need to have things done. On the next slide, it's a collection of websites that are really important and could be helpful to you as you write for a grant, in this case for the DON-STEM FOA. Starting off with just some broad information about Department of Navy, information about FedConnect, which is where, again, white papers must be submitted, information about federal grants at that particular address, grants.gov, where invited proposals need to go. Grants.gov is also where you can find information about things that the federal government is interested in getting information suggestions for organizations and people to provide something that the government needs. Grants.gov is good for that. Information about naval STEM is at that address. The Office of Naval Research, within which the naval STEM activities operate, that's the address for ONR. Announcements of different sorts for the Office of Naval Research can be found at the next address. Cover page information for FedConnect is provided at that address. Office of Naval Research funding opportunities at that address. And science and technology topics for the Office of Naval Research can be found at that address. All of those are, again, useful in filling you in on what Department of Navy is interested in beyond what's being talked about in this particular Department of Navy STEM funding opportunity announcement. Part of the context, in other words, of what Navy is saying it needs and how your thing could fit in with all of those and, hopefully, preferably does. Okay, next slide, please. Just indicates that this is the phase in the webinar where we talk about the questions that have been pre-submitted and the questions that have been submitted during the webinar and provide answers to those. If we run out of time, the promise is made to return all of the questions that have been submitted with answers so that nobody is left without. And that's all this slide here suggests. So those are the slides that I use in webinars to tell people about the Department of Navy's STEM funding opportunity announcement. This slide is strictly for feedback about the webinar. And so I hope I've conveyed to you some important considerations when you're writing for any grant, but in this case, using the DON-STEM FOA as an example. So, David, how do you want to go from here?
I'm going to go ahead and stop share. Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson. And we'll just open it up to the room. I don't have anything currently in chat, but I'm sure people have questions.
Very good. And as always, also, feel free to reach out afterward. My address, I believe you have that, and I'd be happy to get questions from you outside of this does not have to be our last conversation. So very happy to follow up with ideas. And again, the new Dawn-STEM FOA for FY25 will be out in December. The current one, the FY24 version, is going to resemble very much the FY25 version. So you can, if you want to look at the 24 version and start writing even, I'm always happy to look at draft ideas. And until you submit the final, either white paper or proposal, I can't talk with you after that. But prior to that, I'm very happy to talk with people to make sure that, again, you're kind of on the right track. And if I can provide information that would be useful in writing for the Dawn-STEM FOA grants, I'm always happy to do that.
Bravo,
Thanks,
that
Doug.
is wonderful.
That is wonderful. Now, Nina has a question. She wonders if the program director listed on the grant announcement or on the website.
I'm sorry, the program director of which program? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch director of which program.
For each grant, Dr. Simpson.
Okay, in the ONR website, there is the collection of abstracts of current live grants. And if I'm following the question right, the principal investigator for each of those grants is listed, as well as the school. And so if you see a grant that's in the current collection of live active grants that you're interested in, that you have an idea that's similar or complementary, you want to contact a person and a school that has successfully gotten a Dawn-STEM grant, that's what those abstracts represent. All of those abstracts are people and organizations that successfully submitted a white paper and then a proposal and got a grant. And that's why they're in that list. And absolutely, if you want to contact those people, those are the principal investigators as defined by the people who put in for the grant. And they're the ones who can talk about that grant, in great detail, because they're the ones who actually are the principal investigators on each of those, if that's the question. If not, I'll take another crack at it if that wasn't the question.
She has a little bit further clarification. What she means is the program director from ONR. Are they listed on the announcement or the grant RFP?
They would be within the funding opportunity announcement. The people who are needing to be connected with are listed there. There is a grant officer, and then there's me, and we're both listed within the funding opportunity announcement. If that answers the question.
It did indeed. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
It's good to know. Yeah, the people to contact about the FOA are listed in there. There is as I mentioned, the grant officer who is different from me. I handle the technical side of the grants process, the things having to do with the general administration of the grant program. That's a different person, and she is within our grants and contracts office. So that's what that other name is. That's within the FOA.
That's wonderful. In addition to complimenting Dr. Simpson's talk, I posted in the chat the Office of Naval Research's 2024 Science and Technology strategy that really highlights the areas of research priorities for ONR. I hope you guys will take a look at that. It's easy to think that Office of Naval Research is really just focused on things that have to do with boats and the water and the ships, but the Navy actually has more planes and more pilots than the Air Force. And they are funding all kinds of things from STEM education for people that are thinking about going into the Navy or to the Marines, to, health aspects of supporting our warfighters. The document that I posted there, 2024 Naval Science and Technology Strategy, really demonstrates the breadth, the wide variety of research happening because of ONR.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. That is absolutely correct. There is a range of interests. I was trying to imply that at the start of this workshop that the range of interests of Department of the Navy is really wide. That's one of the things I really appreciate. Separately, there is a program called the National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellowship Program, which is a program within which a person who qualifies for an NDSEG fellowship can have their PhD research paid for by Department of Defense, and they owe nothing to the government afterward. Each of the NDSEG fellows gets a mentor who is a DoD PhD, and I've taken 2 new mentees each year since the program started. And again, the kinds of topics that my mentees, just my mentees, has done over the last few years has been truly astounding. One mentee was measuring what people mean when they say something. It's a capability that is really important for coming up with autonomous robots or anything like that. But in this case, when he was finishing up his PhD, he was approached by Duolingo, the company out of Pittsburgh, and they very much appreciated his work. And so they hired him, and he was able to work out some very nice working arrangements with Duolingo, because he said one of the things he had wanted was to not just do work for Duolingo, but he also wanted to be able to continue basic research. And they said, yes, So people who get an NDSEG fellowship are really powerful people. And that's just one example of the range of things that Navy DoD is interested in. Just another mentee was collecting polar bear fat, and literally having to go up there and collect polar bear fat to analyze the things that you can find in polar bear fat. The longer term goal was to come up with sensors that would be able to detect the kinds of things that polar bears are influenced by because where they are and what's going on in their environments. So again, that's not necessarily something you'd think that Navy would be doing, but it's very much interested in. And so, yeah, there's a great range of things of interest. Let me touch briefly on something having to do with psychology. And that has to do with, as we all know, we are increasing the use of drones, piloted drones. And pretty much they operate the same way, that the operator needs to put on some kind of, virtual reality equipment so that they are able to, say, fly the drone and not actually be at the drone, but to have information coming in as if they were flying the drone at the drone. So the information is coming in, they just see and hear the information that's coming in. And one of the big strategies in warfare is to make sure that you can get your opponent to believe what you want them to believe. And so if you can mess with the signal coming into the drone operator and get the drone operator to truly believe that they are flying straight and normal, when in fact they're about to crash into a mountain, you succeeded. And so how do you make sure on the technical side that the signal has not been messed with? Then how do you succeed on the psychology side to make sure the drone operator truly has the capacity to figure out that this is not right? Despite what I'm seeing and hearing, there is something wrong here, and I'm not going to just blindly follow this information, but you need a certain amount of psychological freedom to do that. And so there was a grant that was looking at that, is, how do you build in the psychology of drone flying such that your opponent has not won by getting you to believe something that's not real? That the extension of that is just amazing. For example, there was when we had COVID, and there was in fact one ship that had its crew stricken by COVID. If we were in a war situation, would we have been able to send out enough information to convince our opponent that this ship is actually very battle ready, when in fact it wasn't? Because people were sick. But if there was a way to send out that confirmation signal, collection of information, whatever it would be, to convince our opponent that this ship is battle ready when it really wasn't, that again is something that touches on technology as well as psychology. It just, again, some of the examples I just really find myself fascinated by. So,
They are
happy to talk.
fascinating. Do you have any examples around cybersecurity in the Office of Naval Research?
Do we have any?
cybersecurity research?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. In fact, the one about the drone that I mentioned, that actually is part of a cyber program because again, how do you protect that signal to make sure that it's not being messed with? That is one way to try to make sure that the signal, cyber information is secure. We don't do it just at that level. These were for people who were college age. We reach down to make sure that, again, people who are even younger are being made aware of the fact that, yeah, cybersecurity is an important thing, and here's what you can do to help. There is a program called Sea Glide, and what Sea Glide is for students to build a sea glider, and the sea glider has got to be able to make it across a big swimming pool, and it has to do various maneuvers like rise and descend and rise and descend, make turns. The objective is usually to get to the other side of the pool and grab something, to represent grabbing a person who's in distress or grabbing a missile that shouldn't be there. Grab it, turn around, and come back, and then do various maneuvers again, rising and falling through the water based upon requirements. There is also a component of this where the sea glider needs to send out information. Usually it's just water temperature, could be salinity, could be whatever they require for that particular challenge. And so that information needs to be picked up by sensors on the sea glider and then transmitted. So again, we teach a little bit of cyber. How do you protect that signal? And then on the other side, how do you mess with that signal and get away with it? And that's for kids, So they're building these sea gliders and they're learning cybersecurity doing this kind of like fun robotic activity in a swimming pool. So yeah, it's that kind of approach to make sure that again, so the skills are being learned. There are other robotic programs too. In fact, there's one having to do with the Sea, Air, and Land Challenge, the SEAL Challenge. It was started by a person who had been a SEAL, but was also a professor over at Penn State. And SEAL Challenge, all of the challenges were coming out of actual SEAL situations where they had to go in somewhere and do something, like rescue somebody. And they needed to come up with robotic devices that would help them do that. So it would go across the sea, that's the S part, go across the air, that's the air part, and then land. And so they would build little robots that would go across the air, across the water, whatever it was, and actually accomplish a real SEAL mission using, again, robotics. And they would teach the kids how to do the robotics and learn, figure out from the kids how they were thinking about it, solving the problem. That was really one of those things where, again, that has a cyber component to it. And the SEAL Challenge is still alive and well at Penn State. So that's a long answer to your question.
I love that answer. And as a matter of fact, as you were talking about it, I found it on Penn State's website. It is exciting. I would love to bring something like that to USF.
One of the sustainability components of that, making it viable after the 3 years of Don funding, is what they have done is they go to other organizations to basically add their real life experiences. And I believe right now, Department of Homeland Security has the lead on these challenges. And so they're putting in the kinds of requirements to do the kinds of DHS situations that they find themselves in and come up with the solutions to those challenges.
Well, that is great. And I constantly hear that the key to success is sustainable funding beyond the terms of the award, but that can be really hard to do. Are there any programs at ONR that have funding beyond, so that you can get re-upped or renewed?
Not renewed, not this particular stream. The Department of Navy's STEM funding opportunity announcement is for new innovative projects. However, if you already have one or had one, you can think about it, get a new problem and a new solution and apply to the same funding opportunity announcement. It just needs to be, different enough that the evaluators would say, this is a new problem. They've come up with a new solution. And that's why we think it fits in this particular funding stream for new and innovative pilot demo sort of projects, that we're not just sustaining by spending more money on the same project that they did before. And so that's a way to, in a sense, re-up the concept without actually re-upping the program, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And how often have we heard of scientists and engineers that they do X, Y, and Z on a project and it informs or inspires the next idea? So that's fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it's not just at this level. Again, there is a whole section, not in this particular FOA, that deals with economics. And so ONR has funded some economics research. And again, it's a similar thing. In fact, there was a Nobel recognition of some economics that ONR funded, because it has relevance to what Navy needs to do. And that person's been working on that area of economics for a good number of years, to the point where he got Nobel recognition. And yet he's been getting this ONR funding because there's a recognition that Navy needs this.
Excellent. Excellent. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Simpson? If not, that's okay.
I have nothing in chat right now. No.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Which just demonstrates how clear and concise and targeted his talk was. Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson.
You're very
This
well.
was terrific. I hope that it generates a lot of white papers and draft applications for you to review.
That's a happy task.
It is. We have a lot of brilliant people who are engaged in this summer grant writing workshops program, so I will not be surprised that many of them are thinking now of ONR as their next sponsor.
Very good. And again, feel free to reach directly if you want. I'm always happy to talk with people about their ideas.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, and happy 4th of July in advance.
You too. You too, all of you.
Thank you. And
Thank
for
you.
everyone who's tuned in, if you have a little extra time this afternoon, I want you to write those grants, write those project summaries, and keep writing, because we want everyone to submit a grant at the end of the Summer Grant Writing Workshops program. We're doing great. We're halfway home, and let's keep going. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Very good.